Past week has marked unprecedented escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia in the past 24 hours has fired the hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile in Ukraine. Russia says this is a response to the United States approving the use of long-range American missile attacks that the Ukrainian army fired inside Russia. In a surprise move, Joe Biden had approved the use of ballistic missiles on the 1,000th day of the Russia-Ukraine war. The missile's use was earlier barred since the Biden administration believed it would bring the countries to the brink of a nuclear war. But this approval comes after Donald Trump's win in the American elections. So why did Joe Biden approve the use of this missile is the big question. Joining us live is Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat. We also have Major General Rajan Kochar, defense expert, live with us. Professor Swaran Singh, foreign affairs expert, is joining us live. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is also live with us on the broadcast. Professor Nalapat, let me begin with you first. What do you make of this this turn that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has suddenly taken again?
Well, I'd like to say, Uday, I think it's a huge mistake, quite frankly, because there is a limit to everyone's patience, and there's a limit to Putin's patience. And don't forget that he has got a huge inventory of nuclear-capable missiles, apart from nuclear weapons, of course. And I think now he is in a hurry to complete the process of ending the Ukraine war his way before Trump takes office. Not after, but before. I think Joe Biden's gamble was that Putin would hold off until Trump came, and then hoping that he could do a lot of more activity during the Trump regime. Well, that has proved to be a bad mistake. Now, the sad reality is that Ukraine is a disaster story. I mean, the fact from the beginning itself, the war was lost. There was no way Ukraine could prevail against Russia militarily, and possibly the intention was not to get Ukraine to prevail so much as what to weaken and degrade Russia. But the fact is the defense industry in Russia has become much bigger as a consequence of the war, and the voice of the generals has become much stronger. So all said and done now, this war has been a complete disaster, exactly as it has been from the very beginning. Now, you saw in Libya what happened. Gaddafi was removed in 2011. Hillary Clinton, Obama was the president, but Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden together were very active in that. Then they went against Bashar al-Assad. And in Syria, there were no Al-Qaeda elements at all. Al-Qaeda elements came in the so-called liberated zone. Of course, Assad was supporting Hezbollah and Hamas, and I think that is a mistake on his part. But the reality of the situation is, as far as Ukraine is concerned, the reality is, I think Putin is now going to go all out over the next 2 months and come to a definitive conclusion of the war before Trump takes office, whereas Biden's calculation was he will hold his fire until Trump comes to office. Uday.
Right. Let me, in fact, quickly take that across to Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor as well. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, many believe, that this escalation has happened because of the US's sudden approval for use of its supplied long-range ballistic missiles. This was an approval that didn't happen earlier, but has suddenly come at the fag end of Biden's presidency. Why do you believe this approval has come now?
Well, Uday, it's a matter of a very serious escalation to give that approval now. And I will just like to read out here the tweet by Donald Trump Jr., which seems to put it into context very clearly and gives perspective on the whole escalation in a very clear sort of manner. It says that the military-industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. We got to lock in those trillions of dollars from the point of the military-industrial complex, life be damned, and then he calls them imbeciles. So I think that's a very telling statement, and it is basically to degrade the capacities and capabilities of Donald Trump to seek peace and seek an end to the war by a significant amount of escalation. Now, where this will lead is quite an open question currently, because Russia has fired that hypersonic missiles. There was a lot of talk in Washington DC about the Russians bombing the US embassy in Ukraine, and the US embassy was evacuated. There was no personnel left, so that there'd be no people killed there in the embassy. So one doesn't know where it will go, because it's an open-ended question. Trump has yet about 2 months left to come into play, January 20th. And from the beginning, we have seen that the question here today before us is Biden responsible for this Ukraine-Russia war. If we take a perspective which is not the Western narrative, and see how the war has evolved in different steps and stages, and even the situation before the war started, Macron and other West European leaders had gone to Moscow and had conversations with Putin. And whatever came out here in the strategic circles in Washington DC was that Putin's demands were, or expectations were, that NATO will not expand into Ukraine, and Ukraine will not become part of NATO. And this was a very clear expectation from Russia. And they also laid out that after World War II, they had kept on asking NATO not to expand eastwards towards their border, because Ukraine is the biggest European country after Russia. It has the largest land border with Russia. So getting Ukraine into NATO is a very significant geostrategic threat and geopolitical threat to Russia's future. This is a mirror image of what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1961-62, where Russia was trying to put missiles on Cuba, and the Americans objected and laid siege. And then there was some sort of agreement to withdraw those efforts for putting missiles on Cuba. So Kissinger and the other Western analysts and thinkers have said at various stages that NATO approach should have been different after World War II. They should have tried to include Russia as a member of NATO, or not expanded eastwards towards the border. And the Western world kept on saying that we have not given it to you in writing, that we will not expand westwards. So step by step, they have come into a position where they want to threaten Russia's future and security. Russia is a big country with a lot of natural resources, 11 time zones, almost across the half the world. 12 time zones would make it half the world. So there's just a little less than half the world. So their game plan from the beginning has been to see how they can break up Russia into smaller countries. And whether it happens now or in 100 years is what they are working towards. That seems to be the case. And this escalation is a case in point. Now, how it goes into the future, whether Putin and his advisors have the capacity to restrain themselves for 2 months, or there will be a serious escalation, is to be seen. Because anything that they do, and there have been some voices out of Moscow which said that use of nuclear weapons is a must. Other voices have said that it will lead to World War III and it will be seen very badly by the rest of the world. So there have been very cautious voices also coming out of Moscow, and there have been others which have been sort of very hawkish. So let's see what happens, Uday. Back to you.
Okay, let me take that across to our other guests as well. In fact, Major General Kochhar, quickly bringing you in here on this particular escalation in the conflict. What do you believe has caused it so suddenly, and which way now is the war headed?
Thank you, Uday. I will speak from a military point of view here, because the diplomatic angle has been beautifully explained by Ambassador Kapoor. From a military point of view, what was the situation prior to Ukraine firing the missile, or a number of actually missiles which were of American and British origin, and the Russian response? There are 2-3 things involved in this. First is Biden wants to make it difficult for Trump to arrive at a peace process, because it will clearly show the weakness of the Democrats in stabilizing the Russian-Ukraine war. Secondly, Trump has made public statements that once he comes into power within 24 hours or 48 hours, he will close the war. Thirdly, Trump has come out with a peace plan. Now that peace plan has to some extent favorably been received by Russia. So one important part of the peace plan, which possibly has made Biden react like this, is that whatever territory Russia has acquired, almost 18 to 20% of Ukraine is in Russian control as of now. That will remain with Russia. So that brings us to a point that if that be so, and Ukraine would be on the receiving end of the Americans once Trump comes into power, because he will ensure that Ukraine will fall in line. So there was a lot of pressure from Ukraine also, because we can't entirely blame Biden for this, because there was a pressure to allow firing of long-range missiles. It has, this pressure of Zelensky has been there for quite some time now, and US was not agreeing at that point of time, but now possibly with the change of guard in the United States. And I will end my argument by my assessment. So my assessment of the situation now is that next 2 months there is going to be a lot of aggressive posturing by the Russians, because Russians will ensure that whatever end state they can achieve in the Ukraine war, they will have to do it in the next 2 months. So Russia now has an opportunity or an excuse also to escalate this situation. And we have also seen there has been an escalation in this situation after the results of the American elections. So it is very, very clear. The intentions of the Russians are very, very clear. They will try to get as close to Kyiv as possible, and signaling has been done. Only one missile has been fired. And why only one, and why not 6, 10 of them? Because it's a signal to them that we can reach up to Dnieper River, almost 700 kilometers of distance these missiles have traveled, and mind you, the range of this missile is in excess of 5,000 kilometers. So it is a clear indication to Ukraine that in case you repeat this, and I believe in a televised interview, Putin has made a statement that we will make them pay for it by further attacks of a very high intensity. So I presume that the next 2 months are going to be pretty tough for the Ukrainians.
Okay, let me take that to Professor Swaran Singh as well. Professor Swaran Singh, is this fresh development going to be a blip at the end of Joe Biden's tenure, given the fact that it's being seen as a fallout of his decision to allow ballistic missiles use? What has caused this change in US stand, and what do the last 24 to 48 hours tell us about which way this conflict now is headed?
Thank you. As General mentioned before me, it's been more than a year that President Zelensky has been asking United States to allow him to use those long-range weapons, which were supposed to be used only within Ukraine, to be now used inside Russia. And now what changed in last few days? The most visible change is, of course, Donald Trump winning 2024 presidential elections. And of course, he has a very clear view as to what he wants to do with the Ukraine war. Not only he, his party has constantly made life for President Joe Biden difficult in supporting Ukraine. You remember how his package was being withheld until that was combined with the Israel package for Israel. So in that sense, in this stage of about 2 months left of his presidency, which often is referred as lame duck presidency, making such a decisive turn in policy is nothing but desperation to undercut what could become a decisive change in Ukraine war the moment Donald Trump takes over power. He's been saying he doesn't want to provide any military aid or any support to Ukraine. So this could change the way war is fought. It could potentially make some kind of ceasefire a possibility 2 months down the line. So I think fundamentally it's desperation on both sides, Russia and Ukraine, to try to capture, consolidate as much as possible. And of course, that kind of criticism has already come, not just Trump Jr., but Michael Waltz, the man who's nominated to be the national security advisor of President Trump, has told the Fox News yesterday that this is going to push Russia-Ukraine war into further escalation. In fact, he alluded to say maybe military-industrial complex wants to ensure that we move into World War III. So in that sense, there is a domestic criticism going on inside the United States. But I think what is interesting is that Russia has responded to the use of long-range missiles by Ukraine by testing its very interesting first intermediate hypersonic weapon, hypersonic missile, which has multiple warheads, multiple independently targeted warheads. At this stage, of course, only involving conventional warheads, but potentially it is as good for nuclear warheads. It's an unusual weapon, and as President Putin said in his speech yesterday to the nation, this is a missile that as of now has no counter weapon to intercept and kill it. Because of the speed between 5 to 10 Mach, which is about 3 kilometers every second. But more interesting, it can zigzag its trajectory from the launch pad to the target. So it's really a dangerous weapon. More important, in 2014, just like we are talking of doctrinal change this week, in 2014 also there was a change where hypersonic weapons were described as weapons of pre-nuclear deterrence weapon. So this is the stage before nuclear sort of onslaught could potentially happen. I assume that's not likely to happen because that would require NATO directly militarily intervening, because launch of long-range missiles by Ukraine already means that there's a certain indirect, coordination by the United States in terms of navigation and over-the-horizon targeting and so on. And to that, Russia has only responded by a hypersonic weapon with conventional weapons. So we assume that until and unless NATO directly militarily intervenes, to which he has already announced that he is thinking, and he called this as a test strike to look at the conditions of war. So he's indicating to other countries, obviously United Kingdom, which also has the Storm Shadow missile, which is about 250 kilometers range, compared to this one, which is right now tested about 900 kilometers range. So escalation definitely there. I think this, as the general said, might continue in coming weeks. But remember that Donald Trump is not waiting for 20th January to start his efforts to stop this war. He's already lining out his ways and outlining what he wants to do there. And I think that indication might have an impact earlier than that. What is important is to see how this brandishing of the threat by President Putin is already showing impact. There's a panic in Ukraine. Just now, United States, the world's supreme superpower, has closed down its embassy in Kiev. There's a panic buying in neighboring countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, and so on. So brandishing itself is delivering in that sense as far as President Putin is concerned. So I assume that it's a calculated escalation, and therefore, since we are not expecting NATO to intervene directly, I don't see, as now one of the former generals, now envoy in UK from Ukraine, is saying we are moving into World War III or we are already World War III. I think that's a little exaggeration, and I'm not suspecting a nuclear war to happen any soon.
Okay, let me go back across now to Professor Nalapath. Professor Nalapath, why is all of this suddenly happening at the end of Joe Biden's tenure, before Donald Trump takes over, after Joe Biden, after the Democratic candidate has lost the election? Suddenly you have Adani being indicted. Even though US says that this is not a blip in India-US relations, suddenly you have this escalation in the US, in the Russia-Ukraine war, with this US decision that was suddenly taken. And of course, God forbid there will be more on the anvil. Why is this suddenly happening at the end of Biden's presidency?
Uday, we have to keep in mind the fact that Joe Biden, after he stepped down in July from the contest, I think he's lost a lot of his motivation. So the Russophobes around him, those who basically regard Russia as the enemy, and China, frankly, as only a peripheral concern, they have clustered around and they have made him take this very rash decision. Now, as far as Zelensky is concerned, he would welcome NATO getting into the war because he knows that's his only hope. If it leads to World War III, so be it. But he would welcome NATO coming into the war. And one thing Putin has said is very significant, that from now onwards, Western military targets are also could be the subject of a Russian attack. Western military targets. So, frankly, Putin has, as soon as the escalation was announced, Putin said now NATO has entered the war. And the fact that the US is providing direction finding and possibly having maintenance teams for these very advanced weapon systems in Ukraine. So again, from that point of view, the war has definitely escalated significantly. Zelensky would be happy because he wants to see NATO in the war. And I think the public in NATO countries will be horrified. And I think that is one of the reasons why Biden lost the election. And why Kamala Harris lost the election, because she was stuck to Biden's Ukraine policy, and the people of the United States want peace. Thank you, Uday.
Yes, okay, let me in fact quickly go back across then to Ambassador Kapoor as well. Ambassador Kapoor, what happens next now? Is this reaching a point where there is going to be all-out escalation in the war, or do you believe this is just a minor escalation and nothing more?
Uday, by no stretch of imagination can this be called a minor escalation. It has to be seen as to how it plays out, because it is something which can lead to very wrong consequences and very harsh consequences for the rest of the world. Already the Russia-Ukraine war has resulted in a lot of economic hardships to the rest of the world. And this can only increase that. What I see as the next steps and possible outcomes of this serious escalation is that there is one possibility that the people of Ukraine may ultimately get tired of Zelensky and overthrow him and get some other leader who's willing to be a little more sensible, a little more rational, and a little more caring for their own lives, their concerns, their economic existence, bringing back Ukraine onto track, which is going to be a very long-drawn process, very difficult process over the next so many decades or maybe even a century, because a lot of the Ukrainian land has also been bartered away to the Western, monoliths, the big BlackRock type companies. So besides Russia occupying about 20% of the territory, Ukraine is in for a very difficult time, and the people are slowly realizing that. So the sooner they come to the point where they are able to have a better leadership, that may be better for them and for the rest of the world. Back to you there.
All right, we'll leave it at that. My thanks to our guests for joining us on the broadcast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the Newsx YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.